Started as you'd like.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is Rory Stewart. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute here at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley Forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. A quick note, the pizza will be served at the end of today's event. And yes, today's forum will be titled U.S. Alliances and Partnership, and is presented as the American College of National Security Leaders fall seminar here at the University of Utah. In an increasingly connected world, it is essential that the United States promote strong and ethical world leaders and maintain close alliances and partnerships. This panel will discuss the difference between formal alliances and recognized partnerships and the history and importance of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and why it is important that the U.S. maintain these connections. We are in for a great conversation. We hope you will join us at 2:30 for our conversation on ethical leadership and decision making. Today's conversation will be led by Major General Donna Barbish, and I will turn it over to her to get us started.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I had to look and see what time it is since I'm on a different time zone than you all are. But it is afternoon, and we would like to welcome you to our forum here. It's certainly a pleasure to be here, and we don't get out to Utah very often, and you've got a great place here. It's really an honor to be with you all today. So my name, again, Donna Barbish, retired Army, and wanted to start a little bit about a little background on who we are, what we do, and you've heard a little bit about us. There's a lot in your program that, and I understand there's going to be a QR code to go to the NATO site to learn more about NATO. We don't have a whole lot of time this afternoon, so I am going to be very brief in my comments because we've got quite a few people up here with a lot of good experience that I want to share with you. So, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Partnerships, alliances, you'll hear a little bit more about that. But I want to give you a little bit of background. So first of all, what are we doing here today? We're going to touch on the definition or maybe redefine who NATO is. How many have studied NATO? Handful of you in the room? Very good, outstanding. And how many know the difference between an alliance or a partner or treaties? A little bit of study on those kinds of things. So we're going to discuss some of the issues, understandings, the critical issues that have been in the news a lot lately. And I want to ask you to challenge your assumptions. Do you know what that means? Think about what you think about, and then set it over the side as you listen to what we have to say. Because these people have been there. And we were just discussing this morning about how our perspectives have changed over the years, and as we get into more senior levels, we have a different understanding about the way things work in our diplomacy development and in the military world. So challenge your assumptions, set them on the side, but think about the questions you have. We'll have time for questions a little bit later. We're trying to keep our comments brief, but if you have questions, we encourage that toward the end here. And lastly, we want to envision the future. What should the future of NATO be? Now, I'm going to frame this. We're not talking about politics here. As a matter of fact, politics is off the board. We're talking about policy and what this organization stands for and how we have played in those roles and responsibilities. So, but envision the future. What should the future be? So we're going to look a little bit about the history, because those of you that don't remember how big NATO is, we started with 12 countries back in 1949, and today we are at 32 countries. And you can see from the timeline how that has progressed. And look at that. Safeguard freedom and security of its members through political and military means. Think about that. Think about that statement. And write down if you have any questions as we're going through this, so that you can ask pertinent questions toward the end. Now, if we look at the map, and we look at NATO countries in blue, we look at Russia in red, and you see where we are geographically addressing the issues. And we left Ukraine in yellow. You'll hear a little bit more from our panel discussion on Ukraine. But what I want to share with you is, when you look at Ukraine, who is not a member of NATO, and you bring out Crimea, who was, quote unquote, annexed by Russia. What does that mean? Annexed by Russia. Not recognized as annexed through the international community. Russia believes it's part of Russia. The rest of the world thinks it's not part of Russia. So we'll be discussing those kinds of issues as well, and should or shouldn't Ukraine become a member of NATO? Are they eligible? A little bit more to discuss here, but just to look at the history so we're all starting on the same sheet of music. Now, I pulled this visual off the internet. I thought it was pretty pertinent to look at, when did NATO start? As most of you are aware, right after World War II, correct? 1945, World War II ended. In 49, NATO was formed. Why? For peace and security of the region, with a current threat that had been neutralized to some degree, correct? So as we look at the years, we see the birth of NATO and the Cold War, and we see a few events that were particularly interesting. Key events: 1961, the Berlin Wall went up. In 89, it fell. We could lecture for weeks on this. Then we had the collapse of the USSR. According to all the media back then, peace broke out. We didn't need a military. We should get rid of militaries. We don't need it. Is that true? I don't know. But we're talking about NATO and this alliance, and do we need it, and how much do we need? So we had this nice Europe being reunited and very much calm, and then what happened? 9/11. So I don't know, most of you in the room weren't even born in 9/11. But significant event and a point at which everything changed with NATO. And as you see in that, I think it was the last slide where I said 9/11 was the first time that NATO countries came to help the United States. Okay, important point, and you'll hear more about that. But look at the number of issues we've had since 9/11. So is the threat growing? Is there a relevancy for NATO? I want to remind you that NATO isn't a country, doesn't have dictatorial control over the organization. It's a situation where you agree to support. You agree to support each other. There's percentages of required spending on defense. It says it's required. It's actually recommended. So if you don't do what everybody wants you to do, you're still part of NATO. Anyway, you'll hear a little bit more about that. I'm going to move quickly. Did you have a question?
Yeah, where would you say the Bosnian crisis fits into the history of NATO? Does it?
The question is, does the Bosnia crisis fit in? We're going to have a little more discussion on the entire time frame. And I think it's good to look at who was a member of NATO and who helped and who didn't help when a crisis like that occurs. So I'll defer to my panelists here, who I think have some of that on their talking points. what we'll do now is I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues. My experience in NATO was working with a private organization, a non-governmental organization that did some advice and counsel and education for NATO members. Our first panelist will be Vice Admiral Kevin Green, U.S. Navy. I'm not going to go into their details. You have that bio for everybody. You can recognize that all of us here have had quite a bit of experience, and some of the assignments we have might not even be something that you're aware of even exists, so I'll let them share if there's something they think is particularly relative. Vice Admiral, 3-star general. I don't know how many know the ranks in the military. We start at 1, 2, 3, 4. Haven't had a, I'm sorry, did I say Admiral? Did I say General? Oh dear. It really is a faux pas for those of us, the one service we have that does do it differently is the Navy. So Vice Admiral, and so 3-star, very important. Mr. Bruce Lemkin is Senior Executive Service. How many people are aware of Senior Executive Service? Handful of you here. Senior Executive Service are those people that are in positions that are analogous to the general officer responsibility and level. So Mr. Lemkin was the deputy. I have it written down here. Deputy Undersecretary of the Air Force, but a prior Naval Force commander. And I think it's important too to recognize then that senior executive service level is similar to being a general, but they're not in uniform. So it's a little confusing to a lot of people. And our last member of the panel is Rear Admiral Todd Squire, U.S. Navy. Again, a plethora of experience with NATO. I'm not going to go into it right now, but I'm going to turn over the mic to our Vice Admiral.
I'm on, apparently. Thanks very much for having us with you here today. I'm going to be quick in my introductory comments. So at the age of 17, I left home in Ohio to go to the Naval Academy, absolutely convinced that 4 years later, I was going to flight school and I was going to be like a pre-Tom Cruise guy flying jets off an aircraft carrier. But when I graduated, I went to a ship. I went to a destroyer. And I spent my career in destroyers, ended up on a couple of carriers much later in my career. So something happened. Something happened. And what happened is, the last summer before I graduated, I was told I was going to go on a West German Navy exchange cruise, and I'd be there for a couple weeks, and then buy yourself a Eurail pass and enjoy Europe for a couple of months, and then come back and start the fall semester. I got to the boat in Wilhelmshaven in Germany. I was a European Studies and German major at the Academy. And what I found out was there's supposed to be 4 officers on that fast patrol boat, armed with torpedoes and guns. And they only had 2. They needed a second officer, a third person to run the ship in the middle of the night. So I didn't stay for 2 weeks. I got back to the Academy after the semester had begun in September. And I no longer had the slightest interest in going to flight school. I wanted to drive ships. That was my initial NATO experience. I'd never been to Europe before. Well, that changed. So as I progressed in my career in the Navy, I spent most of the first 20 years of my career in the Atlantic and in Europe, in the Mediterranean, and the Persian Gulf, of course. NATO exercises and operations were the primary focus of the ships that I served on, either in the North Atlantic, chasing after Soviet submarines, or doing things in the Mediterranean or the Persian Gulf, almost always with other NATO ships and aircraft and getting fuel from their bases and from their oilers and so forth. There were NATO officers on the ships I served on. When I was weapons officer on a guided missile ship, the missile officer was an Italian officer. When I was in command of my own ship, my navigator was a German officer. Intimate relationships. And I mean that in the most professional and best way. You're really getting to understand each other and what makes things work. Later in my career, I negotiated for the NATO command in Norfolk a big agreement on conducting anti-submarine warfare. This was during the Cold War against the Soviet Union with other NATO countries. It was a big deal and a wonderful trip to the UK to do that work. I worked in the Office of the Secretary of Defense and did NATO, worked NATO issues there as a captain. My final tour of active duty, I was the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations and responsible for the Navy's relationships, for joint and allied relationships, along, of course, with all the other senior people. The last couple of years, I've been very busy working with the Finns, with the Poles, with the Baltic states, with other countries in Central Europe. And you go through all those experiences and you understand the importance of NATO and what it's about. So what did I learn from all that? In a nutshell, what I learned is there are two things that really matter for countries in their futures. The first is strength. Countries have to be strong. They have to be strong diplomatically, informationally, military, and economic. And survival of a nation is important as well. Common sense, but when you're out there and you're getting to know these people and work with them, you get to understand them in a special way. I learned about that particular alliance, NATO. It is unique, and we're going to talk about that in this panel. It's essential and it is absolutely indispensable for the security, not just of Europe, but of the Western world, of the free world. The duty of members of NATO, the nations that are in NATO, is to consult, to coordinate, and to act on all matters related to collective security. We'll talk more about that. And what's going on with NATO today? It's going back to its roots. After 60 years of relative calm in Europe, welcome, my dear friends, back to the jungle. Eastern members, Poland, Romania, the Baltic states, are the first responders of NATO. Thank you, General.
I silenced
They
the
are
phone.
first responders. They are there. It's their immediate neighborhood. Across NATO, investments are being made. Industrial base is growing. Modernization is accelerating in support of the requirements to deter Western movement by our neighbors to the east. And that's happening fast. So just a few supporting thoughts. In 1691, the writer and historian Thomas Hobbes wrote that a state of nature world where only the strong survive and you get to do what you can get away with, that would be a world without institutions or guardrails, would be nasty, brutish, and short. That's what life would become. The 1930s exposed what dangerous people can do when they have power and opportunity and the international order just stands idly by. The post-World War II rules-based order led by the United States was the modern alternative. And those rules are being tested today, the 30th of September, 2025. My concerns, personal concerns, U.S. force strength in Europe, U.S. ability to reinforce and to position in accordance with the threats coming from the East. I'm concerned about the capacity to do that if Taiwan goes kinetic. And I think you understand what I mean when I say kinetic. The implications of the war in Ukraine, we can talk about that this afternoon. Russian Zapad intentions. Any Russian students here? You know what Zapad means? West. Their exercise series are titled Zapad. Their focus is on the West. Intimidation. They don't hope to go to war, but they are getting ready to do just that. What are their intentions? Possible Russian underestimation of NATO resolve, the Russian incursions over NATO states recently, and the Russia-China relationship. That's my intro. I'll now turn it over to my Naval Academy classmate. Mr. Secretary, it's yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, classmate. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to be here. This is so important to us because you are the future leaders of our great nation, and we're counting on you. So if we can help you in that quest through our perspective and experience, that's the best contribution we can make. So you heard, I'm a Naval Academy grad as well, degree in aerospace engineering, I minored in foreign affairs, and I too was going to fly, aerospace engineer. And then a guy named Admiral Rickover called me to interview. Rickover was the father of the nuclear navy, and when you got called in to interview with Rickover, you didn't say no. If you accepted, you didn't say no. And so that's how I became a nuclear submariner. And so while Admiral Green was chasing Soviet submarines from the surface, I was doing other things under the surface. I commanded 2 nuclear submarines, included NATO operations, most of which I still can't talk about, not because I can't remember, although that's a possibility, but due to things, those kinds of ops still are going on. All my shore duty, when I had it, was at the Pentagon, Joint Staff and Navy assignments involving national security policy, international negotiations, and interaction with NATO. And also, I was just, after my first command assignment, I was selected as a Navy Federal Executive Fellow, master's level program, and was a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, which included a lot of work at NATO. This was a critical time when the Cold War was ending, Soviet Union was collapsing. But I really want to talk about perspective that gives us insights into the relevance, resilience, and transformation that's required by NATO. So you think about when we were born, not Admiral Squire, who was so much younger.
And better looking.
Exactly. I didn't want to say that.
Well, I did. So I did fly, so that probably ought to tell you something.
But you know, NATO was founded following 2 world wars in the 20th century. That was with the principal raison d'etre of avoiding repetition of the horrors of those wars in the future. I just got back from France on a 50th wedding anniversary trip with my wife. And all my trips to France, I hadn't been to Normandy, where my father was sunk, survived, wouldn't be here. My uncle was wounded. And you know, so much tragedy for Americans and our allies fighting to save the world. We can't forget those lessons. That certainly has shaped my perspective and growing up in the wake of World War II. I went, and many of my friends in school, in secondary school, were the children of Holocaust survivors. You learn things that you didn't know were possible, and it doesn't leave you. I actually did an official visit to Auschwitz when I was the Deputy Undersecretary of the Air Force, and I didn't even get to talk about that yet, which I will, the Deputy Undersecretary piece. As I said, participation in numerous Cold War submarine operations, and then work with allies and partners, including NATO. And that was, as General Barbish mentioned, my service in the U.S. Senior Executive Service as the Deputy Undersecretary of the Air Force for International Affairs from 2003 till 2010. Principal responsibility was for building aerospace capabilities and interoperability with our allies and partners. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that because that's important, and it included NATO, probably as important as any group of foreign partners, allies and partners, to ensure, but particularly that interoperability following 9/11 and a global war against terrorism. We don't talk about it much anymore, but that's exactly what we saw. So let me talk about interoperability. We all have different perspectives and experience on this, but I had 400 people working for me when I was Deputy Undersecretary of the Air Force. Phenomenal team of uniformed airmen and civilians. I was responsible for all our attaches, Air Force attaches around the world, responsible for selecting them and responsible for them ensuring they had the tools they needed to do the job. Interoperability, simply the ability to train together, operate together, and fight and win together. This gets right to the purposes of alliances and partnerships, because we're on one planet here, and everything affects us. Capabilities may be additive and/or complementary, and include sharing of concepts of operations, tactics, techniques, and procedures. That doesn't mean a lot to you, but it's, again, what I said before, the ability to train together, operate together, fight and win together. So we talked a little bit about the Cold War. NATO, including US leadership, both military and diplomatic, basing operations and commitment in and vicinity of Western Europe, bolstered by the US, the UK, French nuclear capabilities, was the key to deterring Soviet aggression and was a significant factor in the eventual fall of the USSR. We all experienced this. We all were part of it. In the post-Cold War era, we saw the most significant transformations of NATO, which included the former Warsaw Pact nations joining NATO. So we're talking about all the Eastern European states, such as Poland, Romania, Estonia, et cetera, et cetera. So here we are today, recent days that you may remember. Is NATO still relevant? Yes. Examples. Gentlemen mentioned Bosnia and Herzegovina from 92 to 95. That was the first time we saw NATO in this new modern era operate together to achieve an objective in support of the United Nations Security Council. Then we had the terrorist attack on the U.S. in 2001. I had personal experience in that. I was on my way into New York when the attack occurred. Luckily, I had a late meeting and didn't go until later. But the plane that hit the Pentagon, point of impact was my office when I had been director and deputy director of the Navy Strategy and Policy Division. So again, it was personal. But as mentioned, it was the first time Article 5 of the NATO Charter was invoked. An attack on one is an attack on all. And I remember well the NATO AWACS, Airborne Early Warning Control aircraft, that were flying over our airspace to ensure we were protected. Pretty significant and powerful. Afghanistan, the International Security Assistance Force, ISAF, NATO assumed command of that in 2003. That was all in support of our actions and then NATO actions against Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks had originated from terrorists based in Afghanistan. Another fallout from that was the establishment of the Allied Transformation Command. This recognition to be relevant and capable in an ever-changing world, you have to continuously transform. So we did this collectively. That command is still functioning under a French four-star general or admiral in Norfolk, Virginia. NATO Strategic Airlift Capability, which was formed in 2008. I got assigned that by the Secretary of Defense, and it was to build a capability for transport aircraft that could go any place to support NATO operations or the operations of individual countries. And we started with 12 countries, 2 of whom were not in NATO. So think about this is almost 20 years ago. The 2 countries were Sweden and Finland. They're now part of NATO. And so it just shows the flexibility, the kinds of things that can be done. Ukraine, Poland's drone incursion into Poland, recent examples. So to remain relevant and resilient requires continuous transformation. The NATO agreement at the 2025 summit in The Hague to a new defense spending goal of 5% of their GDP, gross domestic product, by 2035, as mentioned, is an important step in that continual transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Lincoln. So I'm going to be really quick, but we've got to start with the most important thing first. 1987 graduate of U of U, go Utes. My Academy brethren think that's really special. I think you guys know the real facts that go into there. So we'll start with that. So answer the first question that came on here, the relevance of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I did fly, and I'll have you know I signed my contract before Top Gun 1. So I wanted to fly before flying was cool. And I participated in 3 combat operations under NATO command. I didn't even know what the heck NATO was. So to go this denied flight, Bosnia and Herzegovina, 1992-94 deployments I went on. And then Allied Force, or Kosovo you might know about, is in 1999. Again, I had no idea what NATO was. I mean, I was just a JO in the fleet, flying airplanes, doing, you know, the Lord's work, and I was just having the time of my life when it came into that. Then I decided we get to a point where we do intermediate level education. I chose to do mine in Hamburg, Germany. So that's when I really started to see a lot of European nations, and Germany in particular, look at NATO as the bedrock of their national defense. It's the bedrock of their safety as a nation. And it's just so critical for them to go in there. I proceeded to have assignments at the strategic, operational, and tactical level of command involved with NATO, the strategic at the Pentagon with the political leadership there, the operational at U.S. European Command, and then the tactical in the embassy in Ankara, Turkey. So we've talked about a lot of these things. Let me try and tie this together with 3 quick points. The first one, what's an ally, what's a partner? Allies are generational commitments to national defense. They're treaties that are ratified by the Senate. They're binding agreements between nations that become a part of international law. They're thought to be generational. It's a permanent commitment to another nation for your mutual defense to go in there. We use ally really interchangeably when it's not what it is. There are 7 defense treaties, 6 in the Pacific, the 1 with NATO. Partners, those are almost relationships of convenience. They could last a little longer. Israel, partner. Saudi Arabia, India, Qatar, UAE, and the other 150 nations recognized by the UN are all partners. They're not allies. So when we say ally, that's something special. We've talked about Article 5, attack against one is attack against all. Not only is that the only time NATO has invoked Article 5, but nations sent their sons and daughters to Afghanistan to fight side by side with their American counterparts, not because it was in their national interest, but it's because we asked them to do it. That's what a generational commitment looks like. The other thing about it, I would say that NATO is the most effective, well, we'll call it the most successful alliance the world has ever seen. Why do I say that? We've talked about these tactics, techniques, and procedures, how it makes it easier to work together. At the NATO headquarters in Brussels, we have permanent representation from 3 critical groups of government. You have an ambassador from the State Department or Foreign Affairs. You have a 3-star military officer from the Joint Staff. And then you have political leadership also at the 3-star level from the Department of Defense. They live in Brussels every day, and they're there permanently. So if you want to do something, it's not an email, it's not a flight, it's not a phone call, it's a walk across the aisle. Literally go knock on the door of the guy that you eat lunch with every day or the gal that you went out drinking with last weekend and say, we got a problem and we need some help to go into that. So that really came clear to me. I did an embassy tour in Turkey, NATO ally, and India, partner. Anytime we want to do something, we have agreements in place that make it so we can do that better. In India, because we're not an ally, we could not even give them precise navigation for their GPS because those agreements were not in place. But with an ally, boom, you're there. So, 3 things: ally versus partner, allies generation. Article 5, NATO nations are contributors to US national interest and national defense. And then whole of government. The most effective whole of government organization is at Brussels and in, I can only think of the German word right now. Anyway, it's there and it's working today. So there are people walking across the hall to do coordination on relevant and current events that you see in the news every day. So I will wrap it up there and turn it back over to Barb.
Thank you. See, I get called Barb. You get called General. Well, thank you all for that insightful presentation. We opened a lot of doors, a lot of information that is probably somewhere subliminal to what maybe was stated. So we'd like to open it up to your questions. We'd like to hear from you on what it is you're curious about. I hope that you had an opportunity to set aside what you thought before you came in the room, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about what your questions are. So our
And
panel's
I'll bring
open
over the
now?
mic to whoever has questions.
Yeah, we're streaming live, so if you have a question, it'll let the audience know who's asking what. Question. We have one down here. Please identify yourself so we know what perspective you're coming from. Go ahead.
My name's Eric Connect. I'm a Swedish and American first-generation student. And in recent times with the Ukrainian conflict, we have seen a lot of Russian, perhaps, overreach into NATO territory with the drone strikes, and then last year there was also events. But why do you think Article 5 hasn't been invoked on behalf of Poland and the other country that was affected by those drone strikes?
Very good question. Who wants to take that? Go ahead.
So what's been happening now, what my belief is that Russia is probing NATO defenses. And if you look at what went over Poland, they were all unarmed drones. So now we're in this gray area. Is it an attack? Is a violation of airspace an attack? We have not traditionally called that an attack. You know, it gets really squishy with cyber. What's an attack there? We see that. So they're probing that as well to go along with that. But once you make that Article 5 determination, it's a commitment to act. And it's a big step. And make no mistake, I believe they're probing to see how far they can go before we make that commitment to act.
Eric, let me just add to that. I think there's something very illustrative about how NATO works based on the reactions to the Russian overflights of their jets over territory, Estonia, Polish airspace as well. The Polish response has generally been, do it again, we're going to shoot you down. The German response is quite different. Let's think about this. Let's not be rash. Let's take our own approach. That's a very good illustration of how consultation works and how differences of opinion are important and in fact welcomed along this alliance. And that's one of the reasons that this alliance has been successful and has been around for a long time, and why we have 32 members instead of the 16 or so.
And I think Article 5's got to be unanimous, right?
Well, individual nations make their own decisions.
But here's the thing, to clarify where we are. Article 4 has been invoked, which is a prelude, could be a prelude to Article 5, because that's Article 4 is the nations will consult how they're going to deal with this, whatever follow-on action they take.
It's kind of like putting together the Security Council, emergency meeting of the Security Council, UN.
Yeah, I think this is a good example, excuse me, of, excuse me, of Russia's defense objective is escalate to de-escalate. Have you heard that before? Escalate to de-escalate. We're going to push as far as we can to see what kind of reaction we're going to get. And if we make it bad enough, then maybe you'll capitulate and give some away. And that, excuse me, that strategy has gone on, it was established by Putin quite some time ago. So I think that this is where we look at the international community and how much are we willing to tolerate, and the devil's in the details as far as recognizing each member state's perspective. And it's a good thing.
The Russians express that more simply: push in your bayonet. If you feel mush, push further. If you feel steel, pull back. That's what their approach to deterrence looks like. We understand that. All the NATO members understand that. We understand it collectively, and we're dealing with it.
Very complex. Another question. Oh, we opened the door. Please.
Hello.
Go. He's turning it on.
Alrighty. So yeah, my name is Rayshawn. I have a question about kind of NATO and politics. So we've kind of seen all these nations with differing philosophies kind of work together. So I have a question. Does NATO transcend politics, or does politics jeopardize NATO? Because, you know, with Turkey, I think they were sort of denying, I think it was Finland, originally from joining NATO. So what's your take there?
Good question.
You're up.
Gentlemen?
Well, yeah.
Yes.
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 Yeah, exactly. No, that's a great question. We all have that question.
Yeah.
Because that's just, you know, it is a nation of equals, although U.S. leadership traditionally has been key. And, but every nation has an opportunity to make their points, their views known, and what works in accordance with their national interests and doctrine. So it's any international forum, you're going to have you have to reach the best level of compromise that is not harmful to any member.
Was that what you were thinking? And Rayshawn, formerly of ACNSL intern fame, you probably read about him in the papers. But yeah, good to see you. Is that kind of what you were talking about, or?
Yeah, just kind of like how do these countries work?
Yeah. It's complicated.
It's called diplomacy.
Yeah.
That's what you have to
Yes,
do.
it is. And it is. It's a wicked problem. Very, very complex. But I'm not sure we answered specifically, but the answer really is, well, it depends, like any complex problem. And the details have to be worked out within the nations. So it oftentimes looks from an outside perspective that nothing's happening. But I want to tell you, it's like a duck. The feet are flapping and the wheels are turning, even if you don't see something happening. They're working it. Another question, please. Let's go toward the back or the middle, since we did the front first.
All right, we're going to go to Dr. Betty.
Thank you so much for coming today. It's fantastic to have folks like you here to answer our questions. So my name's Tabitha Benny. I'm a professor here at the university. So my question is more a broader view on multinational or multi-aligned organizations generally, not just for the NATO, but as the United States appears to be looking inward in an isolationist manner, something we haven't seen to this extent probably for quite some time. How do you see that behavior by the United States actually changing sort of the nature of the organizations like NATO or other sort of multinational organizations? How do you see that affecting those organizations in the short term and also in the long term?
When national policy is established and maintained, it's not set in concrete. We are a democracy. We elect our national leaders, and they reflect the votes of the people. And they are entitled and charged with making the kinds of decisions that are in the best interest of the United States. Different administrations are going to take different approaches. We should celebrate that as Americans. And as those policies are put into effect, the impacts, the results become apparent and adjustments are made. And every administration has gone through this. In the wild 20th century and the interestingly wild 21st century, that hasn't really changed much. But I think we just need to be responsible citizens, make sure that that we're paying attention, that we're knowledgeable about what's going on, we understand what's going on, and ensure that the people that we have, the people who work for us, the people we've elected into office, do the things that make the most sense to us. And sitting back and being quiet like a mouse or banging the table and saying, you got to do this, you got to do that's not being responsible citizens. It's paying attention, learning, and being expressive in the most constructive and positive way on behalf of all of us. That's my approach. Everybody comes from a unique perspective, and that's part of being a person. Being a citizen requires even more discipline sometimes. And that's as far as I'm going on that question.
I think well stated. Next question.
Good job.
Hi, I'm Saurabh. I'm a grad student with the computer science department here.
Put the mic a little closer so we can hear.
Sorry?
Put the mic a little closer.
Oh, okay. So my question was, why is Switzerland not a part of NATO? Did you ask and did they say no or something?
Switzerland, I've had some exposure, I know you have. Well, no, wait, they fly Hornets, so they fly the cool airplanes that are named. I'm sorry. It's in their national interest not to be a member of any alliance. So and if you look at the Swiss flag, it's square, right? Most flags are rectangles. And they're saying like, we don't even want to offend a rectangle and we're just gonna make it a square. Their chief of defense told me that joke, so I feel safe in telling you the same joke to go into that. But that's just what the population wants, and what Admiral Green was talking about. Nations get to pick their leaders and what they do, but Switzerland believes that their national security is tied in their neutrality. So one thing to talk to Sweden, when I went to Command and General Staff, I had a Swedish classmate, and he said, we're not neutral, we're alliance free. So this is back, think 2002, 2004. The national interest for Sweden at that time was they participated in Afghanistan, but because that's what they wanted to do, not because NATO asked them to do it. They saw it as their interest to contribute to global security in Afghanistan, but they didn't want to commit themselves where if an Article 5 went out, they would have to do something. Switzerland's stuck by that. We're neutral. We're not taking a position, and that's been their national policy really for a century to go along with that. So it's their choice.
And to add to that, Switzerland knows the unique position they're in. They're very important in the world, economically, financially, but diplomatically. When I was involved in the negotiations with North Korea on the nuclear program, most of our negotiations were in Geneva. Spent a lot of time in Geneva. I'd rather be there than the times I was in North Korea. But so you've got to recognize each country for what they are, who they are, their national identity, and their national interests, and respect them where it's possible to do that.
Well, and just like they want to stay neutral, Sweden changed their mind and said they wanted to be a part of NATO. Very capable nation, security provider. I mean, they just bring a lot to the table. And so when they wanted to enter, fairly with open arms with some, I won't go into the Turkey dynamic, but yeah.
Next question.
Hello, thank you guys for coming. This is economics major and political science, third year. Remarkable insights. Given your great backgrounds and experiences, what are your opinions on the conflict in Gaza?
It's a great question.
It's complicated.
Well, yeah, I think what we're going to stop at, because we want to, not really hit that hornet's nest, is we want to see peace. We want to see the hostages return. We'd like to see an end to the violence. And we think that's a really good thing.
Amen.
Hi, my name is Finn. First of all, I just want to say thank you for your service, and we really appreciate you all being here. My question is, with growing threats from Europe, with growing threats to Europe from Russia and strategic competition with China, is it realistic to expect that NATO countries will meet the 2% of GDP for spending on defense, or do you think that the United States will continue to carry a large share of that military burden?
Let me just start very briefly on that. The trend is going in the right direction. Keep in mind, when we talk about 2% or 5% or whatever, NATO, large NATO, does not tell the countries this is what you have to build. As in, Belgium, we need 1,000 tanks out of you, or Greece, 800 fighter jets, or Luxembourg, 100 destroyers. It's obviously based on their individual GDP, but it's their judgment on their military capability. But I think what has generated action and movement has been what appears to be growing indications of threat coming from the East. And everybody gets it. And how they respond to that is going to be different in each of the 32 countries. Now, if your question is, are we just, putting all of our resources after this and they're just sitting back? Well, no. Remember I used the term first responders with regard to the Finns and the Poles and the Romanians? They're there. It's their neighborhood. It's our neighborhood as well. They live a little bit closer to that scary house on the edge, on the corner of the street. They're serious about it, and they're doing the right things. I have real confidence in them. Speak to a Polish officer sometime. You'll understand what determination sounds like. Any Russian who doesn't understand how strong our intentions are as an alliance ain't paying attention.
And I would add to that, just from an experience standpoint. When I mentioned the Warsaw Pact nations, when the Soviet Union collapsed, and then joining the NATO alliance, they had to transform in not only tactics, techniques, but procedures, in thinking, in equipment, things such as maintenance, because they were all using the Soviet model, a culture. It's a culture, if you will. And they all have now converted. We did the 48 F-16s to Poland. Part of that was, I think, 5 C-130s. And now, of course, they're going forward, they're going to are acquiring F-35s, Joint Strike Fighters, et cetera. It's part of this, and why it's a powerful thing is not just, gee, we're selling weapons. No, their military thinking, their culture changes. And they also see that they now have capabilities that can be used, should be used, to contribute to the defense of Europe.
I'd kind of like to push back a little bit on the concept that NATO is not necessarily, or other NATO nations are carrying their load when you go in that. There's two concepts that I want you to think about it. One is a sea story, I'll tell it last. The first one is just kind of the facts of what happens in NATO's. When there's an operation, they sit down at the planning in Brussels, this organization, they tell you, and nations contribute forces in order to achieve the goals of whatever's been set. The more forces that you send, the more say you have on what's done. So it's a choice by nations to have a robust participation in a NATO operation because you get more influence. And the United States has really enjoyed that position of influence. But you'll see like the French and the Turks will often put a significant amount of forces towards the same operation to protect their national interest. Because we're not all the same. And it's just like, put your money where your mouth is, basically, when you go in there, and the more forces you bring to bear, the more influence you have on that. So the second thing is, just because it looks like they're not doing a lot, doesn't mean they are not doing a lot. While I was going through Command and General Staff in Germany, 2004 or 2002 to 2004, what happened in the middle of that? Iraqi freedom. Very unpopular in Germany. But meeting with the National Security Advisor and the Bundeskanzleramt in Berlin, he told us the story of the conversations that their chancellor and our president were having. And it was basically, Germany couldn't support the war, but a lot of the forces in Germany would be deployed to Iraq, and they would leave behind capabilities at the bases that the Germans agreed to take. So what they did, they laid it out and said, this is what we can and can't do. Iraq's out. There's just no way the population will buy that. We can't do it politically. We can send chem-bio defensive capability to Kuwait, because that makes a lot of sense to us, and we can sell that to our nation. But when you send your forces into Iraq, we will give our forces to protect your bases that you have in Germany. So if you look at troop contributing nations and you go first to last, if you counted Germany's contribution to our bases in Kuwait, they were the third largest troop contributing nation behind the UK. Add to that, I went all over Germany, went to every bit, which was awesome, by the way. If you ever get a chance to do that, I highly recommend it. And every place we went, they were 20% non-mission capable for manpower because their people were on our bases. So just because you look at it and you're like, how come you're not doing, a lot of times it's like, how come you're not doing it the way I want you to? And if any of you are married, you can pick when or how, but not both, So, I mean, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And, I am a NATO stan. That's my bias. I'm a big fan. You probably got that out of it. But they actually do a whole lot.
Okay, awesome. Well, that is the end of our panel today. Thank you all for your questions. Let's give them one more round of applause.
Burning questions and you want to stop by, we'll be in the crowd, and please come by.
All right. Thank you again. And as promised, there is some pizza out there, and we also have some chocolate chip cookies. One of each for everybody to start, just to make sure everybody gets a slice, because we had an amazing turnout today. So thank you for being here. We'll see you on the way out.
Oh, hey, how you doing? All right.